Well, hello and welcome to our next video in this series called Can the Bible Be Trusted?, where we are looking at the credibility of the Bible. And what we're doing is we are stacking up different pieces of evidence, and we are following that evidence and seeing which conclusion it leads us to, whether or not the Bible can in fact be trusted. In this video, what we're going to look at is a piece of evidence called the historical reliability of the Bible. You see, this is important because the Bible covers this wide swath of human history and events, and it gives historical accounts of many different people and events and kingdoms and historical significant movements. And so one would hope that if the Bible is in fact trustworthy, if it's really inspired by God, then these events would be confirmed by history. And conversely, if there were a book, a religious book, that were to describe major people groups and civilizations, and yet there was no actual historical evidence that these civilizations ever existed, or the history in that book differed radically from known history, then you would have very little reason to trust a book like that. So how does the Bible stack up when it comes to this test of historical reliability? Well, one important area to look at is the area of archaeology. You see, modern archaeology has given us an amazing ability to piece together an accurate historical record of the world. And for a long time, skeptics have assumed that the more archaeology they discover, that it would simply disprove the Bible. But in fact, the opposite has happened. The more archaeological discoveries there have been, the more artifacts, the more images, the more people groups they discover, the more it confirms the story of the Bible over and over again. And now even many people who are skeptical before of the Bible have come to really trust in the Bible as an accurate record of history. One little example of that I think is interesting is Joseph's tomb. The Bible gives the story of this man named Joseph, who is an Israelite, who grew up and ended up being a king or a leader in Egypt. But for many centuries, people assumed that this crazy story was probably a myth or a fantasy. It never actually happened because there was no actual history in Egypt that said that a guy named Joseph like this ever existed. But just recently, they discovered something that is now called Joseph's tomb, which is a tomb of a man named Joseph in Egypt that is filled with images and artifacts that confirm the exact story that the Bible has of this man named Joseph. And so that's just one small example. There are many, many more I could give that demonstrate that the more archaeology they discover, the more trustworthy the Bible, in fact, proves to be. Well, you know, another important piece of evidence to look at when it comes to the historical reliability of the Bible is to compare the Bible with secular history from that time. You know, the Bible wasn't the only record of history during those times. There were many other people that didn't have any religious motivation whatsoever. They were simply recording history for their own nations and people groups. And so one would, again, assume that if the Bible is an accurate record, then it would coincide with these other secular accounts. And again, in fact, that's exactly what the Bible does. You look at all these other historical accounts and they only confirm the biblical historical record. All these other people groups and events that have their own histories, they coincide right along with the history of the Bible. One great example of that is with the person of Jesus Christ. Again, you might think, well, maybe just the people around biblical times simply made up this story about Jesus and blew it out of proportion. Did Jesus even really exist? Well, the reality is when you look at the secular history from the time of Jesus, there are all sorts of accounts that demonstrate exactly what the Bible says about Jesus' activities, his identity, and what he did and what people believed about him. And so secular history, not motivated at all, not sympathetic at all toward Jesus, confirms the story of who Jesus was and what he did. And so that, again, is a great piece of evidence for the historical reliability of the Bible. So some questions to think about is, again, with whatever your source of spiritual truth is, how does it stand up to the test of historical reliability? And if whatever you believe in for spiritual truth isn't, in fact, historically reliable, why would you continue to trust it?